Hi, everyone. Welcome to Money and Me, this amazing podcast by the Coin Republic, where we talk about all things crypto, blockchain, and Web3. And over here, we have some of the best people, some of the most amazing, some of the top voices from the Web3 space. And today we have with us yet another super interesting guest. We have Jasper with us, who's had a really interesting trajectory in terms of his career in the Web3 space. We're going to know all about Jasper and his stance in the Web3 space until now. Hi, Jasper. How are you doing this fine morning?
Hey, Varuni, great. Thanks for the invite.
It is lovely to have you on our show today. At Money and Me podcast, we talk about how money flows in some of the biggest firms, in between some of the biggest people. We like to talk about money, about how your relationship with money has been in the Web3 space, where the dynamics in which money works is, of course, a lot different. You, however, until almost a year ago, have worked in the traditional finance sector. You worked with Morgan Stanley for a long time, and now you recently made your move to Outlier Ventures, which is, of course, one of the biggest firms, investment firm in the Web3 space. We're going to talk all about it. But first, how has your shift from the traditional finance sector to the decentralized finance sector been? Is it interesting? And why did you decide to drown yourself in this rabbit hole of finance, as I like to call it?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and it's the transition where I think a lot of people in Web3 have done like the traditional TradFi into cryptocurrency transition. So for me, it's been like 6, 7 years in investment banking across sales and trading, and then your institutional research. And now moving on to like the grassroots innovation, working on the on the bleeding edge of innovation. It's vastly different. Although I think both like experiences shaped me into the analyst I'm today, because like seeing both perspectives, on one side, like the very established, the existing financial industry, how they operate and how they are dealing with innovative technology like DLT, like blockchain, how they're integrating it, how they're thinking about things. And then sitting on the entire opposite side of the spectrum, working with very early stage companies who are building out their POC, like combining those views into something is, I think, super interesting, because ultimately at some stage, like these Web3 companies will tie into like your publicly listed large companies, the established businesses, and knowing how they operate and knowing what's currently happening on the innovation side, I think is very valuable, right? Because you basically have a roadmap of how the transition will play out, or at least that's what I like to think.
Right, absolutely. And I forgive me because I forgot to introduce you as the head of research at Outlier Ventures. Of course, Jasper is the head of research at the firm, and all that goes into the back end of researching behind what Outlier Ventures does in terms of all the programs that they've recently released. And I was going through a lot of news pieces which talk about a lot of accelerator programs that Outlier Ventures has been constantly engaging in different parts of the world. We'll of course talk about that in detail towards as we progress in this show. But before that, if you could talk a little bit more about your role at the firm and how it sort of shapes Outlier's orientation in the Web3 space. Of course, they have been players in the space for a lot longer, but does your perspective in the traditional finance sector add to the orientation of the firm in any way? If you could talk about that.
Yeah, definitely. So my role is in a way quite new to Outlier Ventures, because more recently, and I'll go into detail there, is you're working on thematic programs rather than like your ecosystem programs. But my role, my day to day, and my responsibility is mainly around thesis formation and thought leadership. So we create theses around specific pockets within Web3, and these serve as the backbone for the direction in which we take these cohorts, right? So as an illustration, this quarter we are running a real-world tokenization program, we're running an AI program, we're running a decentralized physical infrastructure network program. So all these programs have been underpinned by these long-form theses. So these are like long documents anywhere between 50 to 100 pages. And what they hopefully do is they provide this North Star for founders, right? They give some insight into what is happening in the space, why is it happening now, what are some of the trends, what are some of the things we would like to see. So that's where I spearhead this internally. Obviously, I'm not doing this by myself. Like, we have over 30 experts across various buckets who all feed into this, right? So we use it as the basis on which we like recruit these programs, because also as an accelerator, we are also an investor. So from that perspective, we need to be mindful of like, okay, in which direction do we want to take the portfolio? In which direction do we think there's a likelihood that we'll see excitement in Web3? So identifying all of this is where I spend my time. And it's mainly like, it's mosaic theory of loads of different resources. It's spending time on conferences, hackathons, on X, on Telegram, speaking with founders. It's vastly different from my previous job. That was more looking at like the publicly listed companies, right? But again, as I mentioned earlier, like having the ability to tie that into each other is very powerful. And then for me, I think the deep expertise for me is around decentralized finance, knowing how financial markets are currently structured in traditional equity fixed income, and then seeing the value prop of blockchain, I think is very powerful, because you know where the space needs to go to, right?
Absolutely. You also mentioned about Outlier Ventures focusing on certain areas, a few areas or pockets, as you rightly said. If I'm not wrong, part of your recent work also includes call for builders, which you've, of course, highlighted in your previous talks, etc. Why is Outlier Ventures focusing on areas like RWAs, gaming, decentralized finance or open finance? If you could talk a little bit about these sectors at large in terms of what the value proposition is, as you rightly pointed out, as well as what drives an institution like Outlier Ventures towards these sectors in the Web3 space.
Yeah, yeah. It is like, doing these is very extensive thought exercise, because ultimately you're looking on a relative basis within Web3 at what is interesting, what is not interesting. We're coming at a point in time after, like, it's been 15 years since the Bitcoin white paper. We're coming at a point in time in Web3 where cryptocurrency as a whole is breaking into different verticals, and very clearly, right? So that's also what we identified in our call for builders. So stuff where we're excited about is RWA tokenization. That's, for example, putting existing assets like equity, fixed income on blockchain, and you leverage the transparency, the smart contract execution. That, for example, is vastly different than looking at the intersection between AI and cryptocurrency, which is another pocket we're very excited about, which is again very different than your meme coins and your social or your decentralized physical infrastructure networks. So ultimately, we've identified 8 pockets where we think the next cycle is going to revolve around. Every cycle is very narrative driven in crypto. Like, we saw this in like 2016, we saw this in 2021, when it was all about DeFi and NFTs. We believe these 8 in our call for builders are very much like going to be the center point of the next cycle. How we do this is we go very top down initially. We look at everything that's happening, and then through speaking with founders, looking at the actual tech and the underlying value proposition, understanding the existing industry, what it's supposed to do. That's where we form like very granular, micro-driven opinions around like where the space should go, right? Because Outlier operates at a very interesting point in time where we want to be early, because ultimately we are the very early stage acceleration type of business, but we don't want to be too early. But we still want to have this sweet spot where if our cohort graduates, they can very easily transition into pre-seed and seed type of capital raising, right? So a lot of it is about timing, understanding what's going on. But yeah, like as I said, like 8 different verticals, each have different drivers. I'm very happy to dive into specific ones to give you a sense of like what these drivers are, but they're vastly different for each individual one.
Right. If you could just briefly talk about the eight different pockets, what are they in terms of sectors and how they're related back to the Web3 space or DLT?
Yeah, yeah. So from the top of my head, right? So RWA is simply putting tangible or intangible assets on the blockchain. You leverage the transparency, automated execution, the trustless nature of that database to handle these assets. So the most the most successful implementation of this is financial assets. So we see the big players like your BlackRock, your Franklin Templeton. They are tokenizing T-bills. So they're taking T-bills, which normally are stored on like traditional central databases, and these are put on blockchain. And then like very quickly, like the way you trade, the way you clear these assets, like there's significant improvements. That's tokenization. The second one is decentralized physical infrastructure networks. This is it's a super interesting concept, but it's very Web3 native in that you look at physical infrastructure, which traditionally requires a lot of capital, right? So like any infrastructure, like data centers, for example, like they require a very high upfront capital requirement, and they're also centrally managed. So what Deepin does is it allows through Web3 the decentralization of these services. So for example, like Helium is one of the most famous one. I can actually tie hardware to my Wi-Fi router, and I can broadcast networks. So you're basically mimicking your traditional central telco company services through Web3. That's another one. Another big one we're currently active in is AI and crypto. So it's this idea where like AI is obviously like it's blowing up even in like the more traditional space. Your Nvidias are outperforming massively. But the intersection of AI and crypto is around like the governance, the democratization of access to these AI models, right? Because these are extremely powerful and they're again centrally managed. By underpinning them with like cryptocurrency or blockchain-based systems, theoretically it's possible to to limit the accessibility or the centralization of power of these models. So that's super powerful as well. Like that's more long term. That's like whatever, like the next decade out. And then some of the other ones are like social. So that's like your meme coins. Open finance is this idea where like neobanks are moving into a new paradigm where everything is very modular in nature and it's no longer centrally controlled. So you will have like a very modular type of finance stack for consumer finance, safe interest, borrower lending, payments. The other ones are your Bitcoin ecosystem. So Bitcoin, obviously, the time in the sun again. That's super interesting what's coming up. And then finally, I think we have privacy enhancing technology. I won't go into too much detail there. It's quite technical, but it's this idea where in order to unlock Bitcoin blockchain's true potential, we need technology that enhances the privacy. So in a nutshell, that's the 8 verticals. As you can see, like there's loads to unpack, right?
Absolutely. I think each of the pockets, if we individually talk about them, that would be a separate episode for our podcast. You did, however, mention that Outlier Ventures tends to support businesses or entrepreneurs a little early in their journey. A lot of I'm sure that that does come with its own challenges as well as, of course, great fruits, because if you're able to catch great projects early, it does materialize pretty well. If you can talk about a few success stories that you've personally seen in your time at Outlier Ventures, what have been some of the great entrepreneurs or projects or even services in the Web3 space that you've come across and that panned out amazing in terms of the support, the early stage support that was given by Outlier Ventures, as well as maybe, yeah, till the very end. What was the process that it looked like for the company, and how did it materialize for Outlier?
Yeah. So the interesting thing about this is we engage very early stage with these companies, right? So like obviously there's some type of time lag effect until we see them truly like taking off, because we have the most impact on these companies when they are in the ideation phase, when they have a POC. Some of the, if I look back even before my time at like the earlier stage companies, which are now like having like matured significantly into the cycle, the most obvious one I think we have is like Fetch AI and Ocean Protocol. These are now merging together alongside Singularity into the Artificial Superintelligence Alliance. So what these companies generally did is they worked on the intersection between AI and crypto, especially around like agentic systems. So this is like very simply said, your AI super assistants who perform like your mundane tasks for you, but underpinned by blockchain. So these are companies which we engaged with, I think 2017, 18, 19, like quite early on. And now, like half a decade later, we see them being very successful, and they are prominent players in the Web3 space. The ones that we are working today, I think we have some very talented founders, but more across all these verticals, right? So in the RWA space, we had the Bosons. We worked with Zai Network in gaming, Zcon and Surfer Monkey on the privacy enhancing technologies, Citizens on open finance. So because the frequency at which we have these programs, like we are very fortunate to work with loads of good founders, right? Today we are reaching up to 300 portfolio companies. So these are all companies we are still in touch with on like, it's like to say daily basis, but whatever, like a very high frequency. And these are all very talented people with their own qualities. So I think it's a privilege to work with a lot of them. It's a great place to be because obviously it's give and take, right? Like we also learn a lot from the founders we work with on a daily basis.
Absolutely. So I'm sure that your role as the head of research does come in very handy when identifying the right kind of projects to invest in or to pick up. So I think my first question is, how do you identify promising projects? What are like some of your top pointers that you, is there a checklist that you have before you onboard projects? And if so, what would be those pointers for entrepreneurs or for projects at large that they can fulfill in terms of criterias if they want to be handpicked by Outlier?
Yeah, it's a good. That's the $1 million question. But I can shed some light on the process as well because I think that already helps a lot of founders who are thinking about going through the accelerator, right? So we have a pretty diligent process in place, not only because we take on these companies in portfolio, but also because we know our value proposition and we want to make sure that we have the highest possible impact on these companies, right? Like we want to be able to really move the dial in how we help them and really like instill our value into these companies as well. So we have a very rigid process. It's multi-stage. It goes from very early on, like looking at the deck, looking at the founders' backgrounds and understanding what they're trying to do. And then as the stages progress, we go into very close engagement with these companies. So these are your traditional investment committees where the companies pitch what they are actually doing. They pitch the founding team. And then after that entire process, when we decide to move on, we also do a technical audit of the entire code base. So as you know, like Web3 and cryptocurrencies is entirely made up from out of string of codes. So we need to make sure that whatever the company is selling as like a product is actually viable. And it helps us also understand, because this technology is early stage, there are still limitations, there are still hurdles. So we have an entire tech team in-house who is very knowledgeable across the entire tech stack, multiple blockchains, multiple ecosystems. And they also drill down very heavily into like, is it actually viable or not, right? In terms of tips, I think ultimately you're pitching in the same way as you would be pitching to a traditional VC, with the difference that I don't think you need to have like a complete product. I think we are very willing to like take on anyone who has like a functioning POC and who's maybe lacking in specific areas where we think we can have a very clear value add, right? So we're not looking for like obviously like very strong founders come to us as well, but we're also very happy to consider anyone who we think is very talented, but is just missing, like, for example, legal or your go-to-market or your token engineering. Like, that's all stuff we have in-house. So we're not looking for like a fully finished, polished product, right? So that's why I would encourage like anyone who's considering it, like, just engage and see what the feedback is, because I think that's also valuable ad, right? We spend a lot of time doing the DD, and we also provide the feedback based on that.
Absolutely. And if we talk about the role that Outlier plays in the back end, other than funding, of course, and you did mention technical support that Outlier does give to all the companies that they have in their portfolio. Other than that, of course, instilling the right kind of value. And with a company being in your portfolio does come the brand value that Outlier has. But other than that, what else in terms of support does Outlier provide to all of these startups, early stage startups rather, that they pick up? And while you address this particular question, Jasper, I would also love for you to think around the regulation and the compliance part of it. Is Outlier actively involved in that? And how do you guys perceive regulations and compliance for these startups at Outlier?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it's obviously like I think a lot of people who, and I fully appreciate this, is a lot of founders early on are looking for fundraising, because it not only validates their product, but it also gives them like sustainable runway to commit full time to whatever they're building, because founders are taking on the risk, right? They're stopping whatever they have or going to build out something which is not truly tried and tested. So fundraising is one thing, obviously, but apart from that, it's a lot, right? We run these 12-week programs, and we bolster them with legal, which I'll get to in a bit. So we have a very strong legal team. We do token engineering as well. So anyone looking to launch utility tokens to either do fundraising or utility provision there, we also help them there. We help them on the markets, on the marketing sides. We help them on the operational sides. We have a very strong tech team in-house as well. People like myself who are like deemed as like experts, for example, anyone building in DeFi, I spent my time with as well to explain them how liquid markets are formed, how traditional asset classes are traded, leveraging the network. So, for example, anyone within OV can tap into their existing network to help these companies. So that's the internal resources. And then externally, we also bolster the companies with the mentors. So obviously, because we sit very central in the Web3 ecosystem, we have very good relationships with people across the ecosystem, and we invite them to become mentors. So these mentors are external people who are either serial founders, key opinion leaders, venture capital. So we create this two-way interaction between these external resources and the companies as well. So even beyond our 12-month program, they can either tap into like OV's resources, or they have these key opinion leaders which they can like tap into as well. So it's much more than the fundraising, but I appreciate fundraising is important. And then on your question around the regulation, we spend a lot of time on the regulation and the legal structuring of these companies as well, because it's very difficult, I think, with how the regulatory landscape is currently shaping up to navigate what's happening, right? We spend a lot of time looking at like where the incorporation needs to happen from like either an end market perspective or depending on the product they offer. But the regulatory framework is extremely fluid now. And what happens a lot, and we see it, is like regulatory arbitrage. So because we don't have a supranational regulatory framework, companies and these companies are global in nature, right? They have founders in Europe, in the US, in Asia, all working together. So they're quite agnostic as like where their activity is. But depending on their end market, where they find imminent product fit, they change incorporation quite quickly. So that's also stuff we navigate alongside with them. The expectation is hopefully the US at some point has like a clear framework. And when that happens, I think the expectation is, again, you will see people coming from like one specific area of incorporation, and they will move to the US to tap into that market. So it's this ongoing process. Luckily, I think we have a very strong legal team to guide us through that as well. It's not my expertise. I think it's very it's very deep expertise you need as well to navigate this. But we have it in house, so we provide it as well.
Absolutely. You spoke about these, and we have, in fact, in quite a few questions, addressed the accelerator program that Outlier has recently announced in Saudi. I have a few questions around that. A, what does the accelerator program entail? You've, of course, briefly spoken about it. B, why Saudi? Of course, a lot of businesses, a lot of enterprises are looking at this particular geography, the MENA region, if we talk about it. So why is Outlier now making a move to the MENA region? Is it a particular area of interest? If you could talk about that, what the accelerator program exactly entails, and what the long-term agenda here is. As someone who heads research, of course, there must be a long-term plan that you see behind these accelerator programs that comes with a sort of impact for not just Outlier or the startups, but the sector at large. If you could talk about that key idea
Yeah,
behind these programs.
yeah, I'm very excited about the Riyadh program. I think I think it's a great opportunity. So I like taking it a step back. It's like how we operated over the past couple of years is ever since the pandemic happened, we largely went to a remote first or like a digital first type of accelerator program. Before that, we ran complete in-person programs. So we got all the founders together. Riyadh is actually our first program, which once again will go like fully remote. So we will be boots on the ground in the region, and we will be working with these founders on a day-to-day basis in person. So that on its own is already like again very different. So that's, I think, super exciting. But then just zooming out, taking a step back and looking at what is happening in the region is, I think the MENA region in terms of their approach towards blockchain, but other like other disruptive whatever, like other deep tech is very lenient, right? Like your AI, your blockchain, like these, they're all looking at like how can we benefit from this. From a regulatory perspective, they're very lenient as well, and I think they have some interesting things going on the ground as well, where we could find imminent implementation of Web3 technology, right? So the Giga project is one, but there's so much more going on. Is they're really pushing the agenda for innovation, and I think that's very exciting. Also, looking at more from a demographic, like cultural perspective, these are very like digital native, this is a very digital native society. If you look at like the amount of time they spend on their phone, the amount of interactions with all these apps. So it's a tech savvy, it's culturally very tech savvy. I think they're doing very interesting things. They're lenient on the regulatory side. So this is all a very good, I think, this is all very good soil to innovate, like, or to accelerate very interesting projects, right? So that's why we're in the region, I think. Also the in-person, I think, is really cool. Seeing the founders day in, day out for like 3 months straight building. I'm very excited about it. I think it's going to be a cool program.
Absolutely. And you did talk about how a demography, in terms of how it is culturally oriented, does play a lot of role in the kind of development that they see in terms of emerging tech. And quite a few nations in the MENA region have accelerated in those terms. But if you could speak a little bit more about how, in terms of different demographics, adoption of certain technologies is different, and what are some of the interesting demographies that you guys are looking at in terms of growth, adoption of deep tech? What would those be?
Yeah, it is. So I think one big, so in my mind there are two big drivers behind this, right? The first one is one we touched upon earlier, is regulation. So I think regulation and the ability for users to actually like hold these assets in the first place, for example, utility tokens, or use decentralized finance, is already a large driver, right? Like users need to be allowed. But the second one is, it's less obvious, but it's super interesting once you dig into it, is the cultural side of things. The most obvious example I would say is Latin America. Like they've been, if you look at what happened over the past decades, they're very digital first in the way they perceive financial services. These are like LATAM as a region was like one of the early adopters of fintech. Your traditional like whatever banking 2.0, your open banking, the neo banks. That's something which happened, and now like blockchain technology feeds into that. So open finance is the leg of consumer finance post open banking. So you go into like a fully decentralized type of architecture. And again, we see like a very strong product market fit in LATAM. Like also in, for example, Bitcoin adoption, that's also in this market because they use it as a medium of exchange. They use it for like a mechanism of payments. They are very savvy when it comes to like finance, and so identifying these pockets is very important. Also, when we are looking at like founders or we're advising them of like where the product could potentially see fit, appreciating these pockets and these nuances in like geographical appetite is very important. Also, like looking at Asia, there are specific pockets of Asia that are now like really going crazy of like meme coins and even like very niche specific type of meme coins on specific blockchains and ecosystems. So you need to spend some time looking at like what is actually happening. But once you identify these, we encourage founders to tap into those as well, because that's where they will find the actual adoption, and that's where the rubber will hit the road, right?
Absolutely. One thing that a lot of people say about Web3 entrepreneurs is that entrepreneurs are often trying to find solutions to problems that don't exist, and this is a statement that I find particularly funny because as much as you'd like to criticize it, it does appear to be true for quite a few projects or entrepreneurs. Finding the right product market fit is a challenge for entrepreneurs, especially in the Web3 space. Any key advice that you have for entrepreneurs that are still developing or building, how to stay motivated in this space, to keep on building and to keep on finding the right kind of market product fit? What
Yeah.
are your key pieces of advice on that?
I think it ties back to how you look at Web3 and cryptocurrency. Is I think everyone needs to appreciate that Web3 on its own is not really an industry. Like it is a pocket where people operate in, but ultimately what it does is you're looking at an innovation in the way data is stored in the age of information and blockchain, which is blockchain technology. Blockchain technology itself has impact on all different industries, but it's just changing it, right? Like it's not a disruptive technology. It's like a fundamental change in the way data is stored, but this has implication on all sectors. And by appreciating this, I think you need to have industry expertise of the sector which you're going to like disrupt or change or whatever. I think some examples are, if you're building in DeFi, you need to have at least some base expertise or network, I think, in the financial industry. Or you need to sense check your ideas with people who are already operating in the traditional space. The same goes for your manufacturing. If you're building something in freight transport, I think you need to have a base understanding of how are containers tracked and traced, what systems or what architecture is currently used by the big players, who is a key opinion leader I can sense check this with. So I think that the lens through which you need to look at it is like blockchain and Web3 is very interesting from a technological perspective, but you need to understand the direction of travel and what you're going to do with it. I think a lot of people come into the space as like Web3 native with a very strong understanding of the tech, which is your fundamental requirement anyway. But because they then read, for example, one book about real estate, all of a sudden they're under the impression where they can fix like a very structural issue with a new technology. It requires more than this. It requires a good understanding of like, okay, where in the short term am I going to find traction, and in the long term am I going to change the way this issue is perceived. So it all boils down to like surround yourself with people from the industry which you're trying to disrupt. I think that's very important and is still underappreciated, especially with the more crypto native founders, I would say.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And you've yourself had a journey where you made the move from Web 2 to Web 3 or traditional finance to decentralized finance. Of course, you had a great understanding of how the finance markets worked, and you've been in the banking sector for long. So you did know you were part of the sector that you wanted to disrupt, and now you're finally in the Web 3 space. We already spoke about that move that you made, but what were some of the helping points that you had? Or in terms of your growth graph, what were some of the things that you did early on in your time in the Web3 space that as a beginner, if I may, that as a beginner helped you sail through this space? Or basically what I'm trying to ask is if you have any pieces of advice for beginners in this space, and how they can navigate in this space.
Yeah. Web3 is vastly different from any other industry. It's very engagement based. It's contribution based. So for me, very early on, like I've been in the space since I think 2017, at the earlier days of my professional career as well. Despite being in traditional finance, like my passion was always like looking at the latest innovation, trying to understand what it does, and it's also entailed like active engagement. That not necessarily implies like going full blown to like all the big conferences, but engage with the community, be active on Telegram, try to learn from one another because it's an extremely fast moving space. I think that's the key, is like building out expertise in, for me initially, like where it really accelerated for me was like when the DeFi summer came in 2019, 2020. And when smart contracts were actually used to like do these atomic transactions on chain, having seen the traditional system, like for me, it clicked like, okay, this is actually a very strong value prop. But then engaging with like the very early protocols when they spun up, like your Uniswap, SushiSwap, your Curves, your makers, just looking at the forums, actively engaging there is super important. And then I think for anyone wanting to move into full time, I think as you engage more and more and you find yourself sitting more central in these even small pockets of the ecosystem, I think the transition becomes more natural. I think it's more difficult when like you're in the traditional space and you want to hard force into Web3. I think you need to start with engaging, learning, understanding the rules of the road, because it is quite different.
Absolutely, gauging the rules of the road is more important for the journey that you take. And finally, I've come to the last question, which has to be about your vision for this space at large, and what is Outlier Ventures' vision and mission. If you could also talk about that briefly, and how both your visions tie in, if at all.
Yeah. I think we're at a very interesting point in time. Like we have been building out the tech stack for the past 15 years, and we're at a point where, from a technical perspective, actually a lot is able to be hosted on blockchain through the SDKs, the tooling. So I think we're at a point where like now we need to start actual like finding product market fits with the vast majority of users, right? Currently, the space consists of power users who are willing to put up with a lot of friction. I think also with the intersection with AI, like a lot is going to change over the next couple of years. I think the next decade will be very interesting for Web3. You see large corporates also starting to adopt Bitcoin, accepting Bitcoin on balance sheet. So digital assets are more broadly accepted, I would say. So I think the next decade will be one where we go from slow and gradual to like very like into these inflection points. So S-curve adoption, I think, is definitely in the cards over the next decades. And that's also, I think, where we as OV want to play a critical role, right? We're coming up to 10 years of Outlier. So we started with the incubator in 2014, and then we moved on to the accelerator 5 years ago, I think. So we have been playing a critical role in the ecosystem, and that's something we want to continue, right? Is really bringing these founders the right knowledge, and just helping them into like the very early stage of their journey. So It's going to be an interesting one. I think that's also why we are moving to like these thematic pockets, because the space is really broadening, right? From a very narrow narrative into like across different sectors. So yeah, that's what our aim is. Like, we just want to bolster the right founders with the expertise they need to go from 0 to 1. I think, and that's what everyone at OV is about, is just pushing these founders forward.
Absolutely. Here's to OV pushing founders and the limits of development and adoption in the Web3 space. Thank you so much, Jasper, for joining us today on Money and Me podcast by the Coin Republic. It was my absolute pleasure to host you. And before we close, do you have any final words on the show? Anything that you would like to talk to our audiences about?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you very much for the invite, obviously, and to anyone who's listening. Like, we talked a little bit about the work we do. Obviously, now this call for builders. If you're someone building in Web3, you feel like you could use the support an accelerator provides you, please get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. We're always happy to engage. Everything is on our website, on our socials. You can find it. But if that's not enough, like, just reach out to me personally. I'm very happy to engage. Or at least point you in the right direction, if that helps.
Thank you so much, Jasper, and I hope that anyone who's listening out there does get motivated to educate themselves better in this space, and of course, look up Outlier Ventures if you haven't already. And Jasper is here to help us out. If there are any entrepreneurs or founders who have interesting projects up their sleeves, of course, OV has a way to find a product market fit for you guys. Thank you so much, Jasper, for joining us today and for all the amazing conversations that happened on Money and Me by the Coin Republic. Once again, thank you everyone for joining us. We'll see you next time with another super interesting guest from the Web3 space. And until then, bye bye.